Devora.
This year, okay, this learning is devoted to a refresh Lema for Alta David ben Devora and all Cholim of Klal Yisrael.
Amen.
Continuing with the theme of davening, interrupting davening. Okay, so it says here, for those of us wearing talesim, or eventually when all of us will wear talis, if one's talit falls off in the middle of Amidah, but part of it remains on him, he's permitted to fix it. However, if his entire talit falls off, he's forbidden to rewrap himself in it. Since the act of rewrapping considers interruption or hefsek, if being without a talis disturbs him so much that he cannot concentrate, he may wrap himself in it after concluding the bracha that he's in the middle of reciting. And that comes from Mishnah Brura. Someone else who sees a person's talit fall off is permitted to put it back on him. While praying the Amidah, it is forbidden to respond to Kaddish or Kedusha. However, he may silently concentrate on what the Chazan is saying, and it will be considered as if he recited those words himself. And that is the custom. Nevertheless, if such an interruption will disturb his kavanah, he is permitted to continue praying. Okay, then it goes into just one thing about Ala Nisim here. Let's see if that's... okay, let's just say it anyway. If one arrives at Ala Nisim during Chanukah or Purim, and he doesn't remember the words, he is permitted to walk to get a siddur in order to recite it, despite the fact that failing to recite it doesn't prevent him from fulfilling his obligation of reciting the Amidah. If possible, it is better that he hints to someone to bring him a siddur. It seems that it is forbidden to walk in order to verify a law that for certain doesn't prevent someone from fulfilling his obligation, since the study of halacha detracts from one's thoughts of prayer and constitutes more of an interruption. Therefore, as long as it is clear that it is not a matter that prevents him from fulfilling his obligation, he may look it up. But if you can, you can leave out. If you get to say Ala Nisim on Purim or Chanukah, you're still fulfilling your obligation. Rosh Chodesh, you have to repeat the Amidah if you don't say Yale v'Yavo. And the same is for the Shalosh Regalim of Shavuot, Pesach, and Sukkot.
Good, thank you, Kev. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Kev. Well done.
I'm going to share my screen. I want Gavin to read. I think he's in the best state out of all of us.
He looks in a good space. Yeah.
Gav, just read the top Mishnah. Well read, Kevin, on the halacha. Really appreciate your halacha. Really. Thank you, man. I've learned something.
I feel sorry for the rest of us if I'm in the one good space, but anyway, thank you. Okay, the Mishnah continues to discuss the law of a fire that a person lit in his own premises, but which then spread to a neighboring property and caused damage there. If a fire crossed the wall 4 amos high, sorry, there was a spider, sorry, 4 amos high, or a public road or a river, he, the owner of the fire, is not liable to pay for any damage subsequently caused by the fire.
Perfect.
Carry on.
No, that's just the first Mishnah that we need. No, that's it. We're only on that first Mishnah at the moment. The Gemara is going to deal with it. Okay. We will get to the second Mishnah, in which case you can read with pleasure. So just
did you just place them together?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's just easier for me to edit.
No, it's fine. It sounded strange. It is a Mishnah, no Gemara. Yeah, okay.
So obviously, we, as Gavin says, we're dealing with a person who lit a fire in his own premises, and then it was separated by a wall from a neighboring field. He didn't guard the fire himself. So what he's doing here is he's expecting and relying on the wall to prevent it from spreading. Now, the wall has to be at least 4 amos high. Then he's not responsible because that's a sufficient barrier. It goes without saying that it can't be made the wall from a flammable material. I mean, that's obvious. I don't even have to state that. Now, the 4 amos, this is very important, are not measured from the ground, but from the top of the wood pile beneath the fire, which means you actually need more than 4. How did that calculate? This is the only thing I don't understand. This this was a commentary by Tosfot and Rashi, is when the fire has burned all the wood below it, how do you calculate how high that pile was? Just asking. I have no idea. Now, when it's talking about a road in the Mishnah that you guys see, we're talking about at least 16 amos wide. How do we get that particular size? If you look at the 99 stuff in Gemara Shabbos, it discusses the width of the Israelite camp in the wilderness, and they were 16 amos to accommodate wagons. They had wagons in those days, and those wagons had to carry the boards to dismantle the Mishkan. So whenever it uses that term public road, that's the automatic size default. So obviously any strip of land 16 amos or wider exempts the person who lit the fire from liability, because there's not flammable material in the road. It's not as if it's catching on thorns or produce or whatever the case may be. Now, obviously, there is an opinion in terms of, is that sufficient? And we're going to learn that even according to our Mishnah, 16 amos only suffices when there's no wind that's blowing. Because if there is some wind, you need a greater distance. And we're going to find out what that distance is. But in the meantime, the Gemara is going to qualify the Mishnah's ruling, and it's going to refer only to a fire that rises directly upward. In other words, no wind. And it doesn't tend to move horizontally at all. So then there's going to be two factors. There can't be anything that really is flammable on the way to almost fuel the fire, where it gets its energy from. And it cannot be a wind. Because any fire that could travel an unlimited distance, the road's not going to protect it. Neither is a wall, especially if there's wind involved. Now, in terms of the required width of a river, we're going to go through that in the Parsha and where it's derived from. And as far as other barriers are concerned, it's not usual for a fire to cross it. But if it does, it's like in your insurance claim, it says if there's a lightning strike, it's known as an act of God. I don't know if they've rewritten the Insurance Act. Everybody's an atheist today. But they might deem it instead of, no, by law, it used to say it was, we're not covered for act of God. But now they would probably say.
No, they should change it to be an act of government. They consider government God.
So funny enough, they do. They say, in my insurance policy, they say with MRB, please note we do not cover natural disasters, acts of God, political insurgents, Gavin, I think the word was.
Insurgency.
Insurgents.
You mean like, does that include looting, like what happened last time?
I don't know, I'm not sure. But look, insurgency might be the insurgents. Is that the noun?
Adjective. Adjective.
Political insurgents is the adjective, yeah, because it's describing the noun. Yeah, so insurgency, yeah. Anyway, so let's just go through some of the issues with the Gemara. So the Gemara is not sure where the Mishnah gets this 4 amot rule from to exempt the owner of the fire from liability, because they found a brisa to the contrary. And what does that brisa say? If it crosses a 4 amos high, he is liable. Whereas in this particular Mishnah, it contrast to the brisa, it said he's not liable. So the Gemara obviously solves the contradiction. Quotes Rav Papa, who said that our Mishnah is written by the Tana, and he's doing the calculation, reckoning it from a higher to a lower height. So what do we mean a higher to a lower height? If the wall is 6 amot high, right, the owner of the fire is exempt. If it's 5 amos high, it's exempt. If it's lowered until it's only 4 amos high, it's exempt. Okay, so far we're good. In other words, the Mishnah describes how long a wall must be before a fire can stop it. So even if a wall is as low as 5 amos, it still is effective. But the Tana of the brisa is doing the calculation the opposite way. In other words, he's reckoning from lower to higher. So if he says the wall is 2 amos, he's liable. If 3 amos, he's liable. Indeed, if a wall is raised until 4 amos, he is liable. So how do we interpret this? Well, we interpret it as follows. It uses the term ad arba amot, meaning until 4 amos is liable. In other words, until it actually reaches exactly 4 amos is liability. But if it's just under 4 amos, he's completely culpable. That wouldn't stop a fire. He's only off the hook and exempt from liability if it's 4 amos exactly and higher. So that's easy to work out, that if it uses the phrase ad, until, it can be assumed that the Mishnah was also meant to be understood in that same manner. So in other words, if you're going from high to low or low to high, it makes a difference. Because if I say I'm counting from 5, it's different to say if I count up to 5. Does that make sense, guys? Sorry, I'm still sharing the Mishnah. I forgot to share my screen. When I shared my screen, I forgot to talk to you in person. So in other words, there's not a contrast between the Braisa and the Mishnah at all. It's just the Tannas are calculating it the opposite way. Now, that's resolved. The Gemara says that there's a law where the 4 amma wall exempts from one from liability. Rava said that the requirement of 4 amos that the sages stated, in which the case of the owner of the fire is not liable, not liable, applies even where the fire crossed over to a field of thorns. Now, why, guys, would you think that that would make him liable? You learned it before.
It crossed over to a field. I didn't hear the one word.
A field of thorns.
A field of thorns. Okay.
You're saying it shouldn't be liable if it's thorns. The thorns are not not much use.
No, but we did learn.
You're saying why is he liable?
We did learn before in the 60th daf that thorns are very dry and they tend to be wonderful fuel for a fire. In other words, it's like a dry wood where it can spread very easily. So you would have thought that in that case, if I've got in my property barren land, it's very difficult for a fire to take hold if it's just a dry land. In other words, just earth. What is the fire going to catch onto?
And sand, you mean?
Sand. It's not going to catch onto sand. It is going to catch on to a thorn bush or any sort of dry wood or grass area that's dry, ultimately. And therefore, you might have thought that the person that creates such a wall is not exempt in that case, because there's certainly fuel that can go up to the point of the wall and maybe create a limitation in terms of what that wall can protect. And the flame can leap across the wall as long as it can catch on something the other side. So that's a chidush that we learn that according to Rava, that the one is exempted from liability. So Rav Papa qualifies this point. He says, look, but from the top edge of the thorns and upward to the top of the wall, it must be a distance of 4 amos, meaning that there has to be a space. The top of the wall must be at least 4 amos higher than the top of the thorns in order to retard the fire. So that's in addition to the Mishnah's requirement that the wall must be at least 4 amos higher than the pile of wood underneath the fire. So even if the wall is very high and rises far above the wood pile, it doesn't provide protection unless it's also 4 amos higher than the thorns on the other side, because it's possible that the fire could attach itself on a neighbor's property that heat transcends the height of the wall. Okay, so that's Rav Papa's qualification. So the Gemara comments on this Mishnah. It says Rav said that they don't teach that the owner of the fire is exempt, except in the case of a rising fire. But in the case of a bent fire, even if it crossed a barrier that measures as much as 100 amos, he's liable. So all it's saying there, that what do you guys understand by a bent fire compared to a risen up fire? Guys, do you have any idea?
Does it have something to do with Lavud in Sukkah? Does it have any similarity in the description?
What do you mean? Explain.
The bent wall is
no.
The
wall is
nothing to do with it.
It's known as a fire.
No, I'm saying the bent fire. Does it have any similarity in the description?
No. So they call it bent fire. A fire, you either have a fire that's just a bonfire, which is relatively safe, or one that looks like it's bent over because it's catching by a huge wind and it's taking everything in the ground around it. like those forest fires in Australia. So then you can't even expect a road 100 amos to protect you from that because of the sheer pace at which it's proceeding, as well as the additional aid of the wind. So it's saying that ordinarily the Mishnah says you're covered if there's a road of 16 amos, but not in the case of a bent fire, or meaning a fire that's moving horizontally instead of just vertically. Okay, so a wall is not going to be affected. They're definitely not even a road, which is wider. And so what the Gemara is saying is that basically is that Rav is saying that you actually have to look and see what sort of fire is it in order to create that sort of exemption. Now, Shmuel does not agree. Obviously, whenever you have Rav with one opinion, generally Shmuel disagrees. He says, our Mishnah refers to a bent fire. But in the case of a rising fire, even if the barrier is minimal, he is exempt. Okay? So what he's basically saying is that according to Shmuel, although a bent fire travels horizontally, a 4 amos high wall or a public road on a river suffices to exempt the owner of liability. In the case of a rising fire, which moves only upwards, the slightest barrier suffices. So what's the argument between Rav and Shmuel? I just want to test that you guys are listening. And what is Rav's opinion and Shmuel's opinion? I've just gone through it.
Can't hear you so well. Sorry, Damon, you distorting. Can you just repeat that?
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so Rav is basically saying that it's not covered in our Mishnah, a bent fire. In other words, a fire that's sweeping across. It's only covering a normal fire that's going upward. So a wall would suffice, a river would suffice, and a public road would suffice. And Shmuel is saying, no, this is actually talking about a bent fire, not with the wind, but a fire which is relatively low and is catching the area around it. But if you have a fire retardant, which is a rip in between the wall or a public road, that suffices to exempt you. So there's certainly no problem as far as that's concerned. So that's where they disagree. So the Gemara actually corroborates the opinion of Rav. In other words, it's seeming to disagree with Shmuel and say, look, there's only very circumstances where the Mishnah will cover you in the case of a wall, or a road, etc. And what does it do? It brings a brisa that was taught in accordance with Rav, and it says, when do we apply our Mishnah's ruling that a public road, which is 16 amos wide, suffices to exempt the owner of a fire from liability? It says the rule applies in the case of a rising fire. But in the case of a bent fire, for which wood is available, in other words, we're not talking about with a wind here, because the minute there's a wind, there's no coverage. We're talking about that there's some flammable material, either the grass is very dry, or that there's wood, or some sort of fuel that the fire can have catching. And in that case, it doesn't matter if you've got a decent barrier. Either way, if you light a fire in your property, and you know that there's something separating you and your neighbor, but you know that the fire can carry because of flammable material, you're completely liable. You're not off the hook. So in the case of a bent fire for which wood or any other fuel is available, even if the road was as much as 100 mil wide. So 100 mil wide is not mil as in milliliters, but it's an ancient measurement which basically says it's 2,000 amos. So that's huge, guys. That's huge. So in that case, even in that case, he's liable for any subsequent damage. Why? Because it doesn't make any difference how far the fire bent and traveled. The one that caused such a fire, if he knew that there was enough dry grass and habitat to fuel such a fire, he's liable. Okay. So the brisa continues, if a fire crossed a river or a shelulis that are 8 amos wide, he is not liable. So we've got to determine what actually is a shelulis. We don't know. So therefore, a public road is 16 amos, but a river is 8 amos, or a shelulis is 8 amos. Why would you think that would be less than a road, guys? That's logical.
Because of the amount of people that commute every day, that use it to commute.
How do they commute across a river?
I thought you said a road is 16 amot because more
Yes,
people
no.
use the
A road
road.
covers you for 16
A
hours.
river, they have to have a boat.
No.
A boat
Okay.
or a bridge.
No. So let's just look at it logically. If you're no longer liable if you've got a river or a shalulis that's 8 amud wide, because anything with water is going to retard fire. So with the road, as long as it doesn't have fuel, 16 amos wide, there's nothing for the fire to catch onto. But water is going to actively extinguish a fire, so you need less of a distance. That's why you can suffice instead of a 16 with 8 amos, obviously, because it's going to extinguish the fire. So obviously what it must be is a shalulis is some other form of water or some other form of fire retardant, just like a river is. So the Mishnah is going to teach, if the fire crossed a public road which is 16 amos wide, the owner of the fire is not liable for any subsequent damage. So who's the Gemara is asking, who's the Tana of our Mishnah? Is it Rav Eliezer, as we learned in the Mishnah, who says 16 amos like a public thoroughfare? So that's the distance that Rav Eliezer requires for the owner of the fire to be exempt from liability. Okay? Just as a matter of interest, guys, can you see me? Because it says my internet connection is unstable. I think it's fixed up now. So the Mishnah states, or a river. What is meant by river? Rav said it means an actual river. Shmuel doesn't see it as a river. He said it's an irrigation ditch. He said because it's very unlikely that there would necessarily be a river there. An irrigation ditch works the same as a river. In other words, it's not natural. It's a man-made body of water used to irrigate fields, etc. But it's just as much of a fire retardant as a river. But that's how they interpret it. The word nahara. So the Gemara is going to elaborate an opinion. So the one who says it means an actual river, or that even if there's no water in the river, it's still an effective barrier. Okay? Because a river is wide. In other words, it's similar to a public road, so it can stop a fire even when no water is running through it. As long as there's nothing flammable to catch, after 16 amos, it's enough for the fire to die out. So Rashi implies that a dry riverbed like a public road must be at least 16 amos to function as an effective barrier. But the one who said it means that it's an irrigation ditch, or that if there is water in it, it's an effective barrier. But if there's no water in it, it's not an effective barrier. Why do you think, guys?
Because it's not going to stop it.
Why?
The water's a deterrent. It actually puts out the fire.
Extinguishes it.
Yeah, but why is it okay in the case of a river that's dried up?
Because it has to be 16. It can't.
Correct, and therefore,
so if it's dried up and it's 8.
So therefore, what we learn is an irrigation ditch. Exactly, Gavin. Therefore, we learn an irrigation ditch is generally not 16 amot wide. It's long and narrow. 16 amot wide is huge, and that's generally created by a natural body of water that's worked in the crevices of the rock face. But to actually dig that sort of trench through heavy rock is going to be near impossible. You're going to have a narrow area of water that goes between fields, and then they're able to take water out of that and irrigate manually. Exactly as you said. So it's too narrow. The water drops up in the irrigation ditch, but not too narrow in the case of a river, because it's still then treated like a public road where the fire's not going to catch onto anything flammable. Perfect, guys. That's exactly it. So the Gemara previously discussed a brasa that stated if a fire crosses a shalulis, the owner of the fire is exempt from liability. So we learned this term in a Mishnah elsewhere, and I'll just tell you the source. It says in Leviticus, chapter 19, verse 9 and 10, and chapter 23, verse 22, it talks about a pair. Guys, do you remember what a pair is?
Remember the name?
Corner.
Not
Correct.
What's
Perfect,
it?
Kevin. Kevin's got a good memory. It's a corner of a field that you must leave it for the poor. So there's different ways to
Well
work
done.
out a corner of a field. And it said, naturally, there's only got 4 corners because, you know, there's you've got land is squared off. But in the case of a barrier, that creates more corners to which you have to give the poor. So what these particular factors divide a field further. It's a ravine. So a deep ravine runs between 2 sections of a field. The owner is obligated to leave a pair from each one for the poor. Okay. You have a shalulis, which we're going to learn what that means, a private road and a public road. Now, we learn that if a private road has to be 16 amos wide, it's obvious that a public road is going to be as big because it's used by more people. So there you covered. Public road, private road, ravine, that's you covered. The only thing we haven't learned is shalulis. So the Gemara says, what is the shalul? Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, it's a place where rainwater collects, from the word shalulin. Okay? In other words, it's a depression or a cavity in the ground. And it says, it means collection. Actually, the word shalulin means collection. So it says it's a place where rainwater collects. But Rav Bivi said in the name of Rav Yochanan, it's a channel of water. How does he get this? Because it says, which bestows bounty, shalom. Shalom means bounty upon its banks. Meaning if it's water is drawn from it to irrigate fields, which produces fruit, and therefore it's known as bounty. So the one sees it as bounty, and the other one sees it where rainwater collects. So obviously the Gemara just examines the dispute. The one who says that a shalulis is merely a place where rainwater collects, holds that a channel of water certainly divides a field. Okay, but the one who says a shalulis is a channel of water holds that only a channel of water divides a field, but a place where rainwater collects doesn't divide a field. Why? Because they are called bowls of the land. So what does that mean? It means, it's in Shmot chapter 24. It discusses that they're low-lying places and they're part of the land. So you can't, if it's part of the land, divide the land into separate fields with respect to the pair obligations. It's not like it's a man-made separation. It's natural. It's part of the land. It's the topography. So as far as the blocking of the fire is concerned, the reason is irrelevant, basically because everybody could agree that both entities, whether it's a channel of water or a place where rainwater collects, are equally effective at getting rid of the fire. But there's some Rishonim that maintain that when you want to stop a fire, if you interpret it as a channel of water, then that is effective. Whereas where rainwater collects is not, because you can't be guaranteed that rainwater will be collected there, because it's natural topography. There might be a rainy season. It's not a purposeful irrigation ditch or anything like that. Does that make sense, guys? Okay.
And it's not permanent.
Well,
the
yeah,
structure is, but not the quantity.
Correct. All right. So, guys, I think we're done here. I'm happy at this point. We covered quite a bit. I don't know if you guys are happy. We basically went.
But no, you didn't cover a lot of ground.
Just a question before you finish, Damon.
Sure. Hang on, Kev. We went from 61A1 to 61B1. Now, we did an Amud today. That's pretty good.
Sure.
Yeah. But it's not as hard as some of the other sections.
No, it's not.
Yeah, it's not too complicated.
I know.
But,
it's not too complicated. So what's your question? Sorry, Kev. Sorry, man.
With this shalulis, would it be like, it would be in the public domain, basically, like a river, like in the open. That's where it would be.
I don't think so necessarily.
It collects rainwater, like the sewers, like a drain.
It doesn't seem to be, for one reason. I might be wrong. But if it's where rainwater collects, it could be anywhere. It's according to the topography of the land. And generally, it wouldn't be where the public are, because they wouldn't want water as an interference. But it wouldn't be in somebody else. If it's when rainwater naturally collects, it might not be a private area either, because one person wouldn't be entitled to all that water. So they might build the town around the natural irrigation, like a river or where rainwater collects. So I'm sure the public would have access to it. So yeah, but it wouldn't be by the road.
So it's like by where's an example, like by bridge there, by like the highway by Waverley Scuttle, isn't there like I'm just trying to think where one would be.
I think there's one near Modderfontein.
Okay.
But I'm thinking that Damon, it could be by the road. I've just listened to me yummy out. I know it could be anywhere, but I'll tell you why they might have had it by the road as well, because obviously other places are important and higher places collect more water. So my point is that they possibly, by having it on the side of the road, it means that people that are walking can always have access to water as well as the animals.
But I just said that in my second statement. I said it wouldn't be on the road, but it would be nearby, because I hardly think, if it's part of the natural topography, that one person should be entitled to it. I agree with you completely, Gavin. I said to you it would make sense that many people could share it. But as long as it wouldn't interfere with the travels, it could be adjacent to the road. I agree with you completely, Gav. The only problem is that when it's part of the natural topography...
And they might have one.
Yeah. They might have one. Sorry, what did you say?
No, I'm saying that they might have one like sort of every couple of kilometers, so you can always get like a filling station, because in those days they didn't need that, but they needed water for the animals, they needed water for humans, so they might
refreshment stations,
like refreshment stations along the way on the route.
It makes sense, and even if you call
obviously it would be nice if every road had it.
Yeah,
it could be every road. It could have been some sort of ditch that they had it on every single road, because it didn't really cost much to produce it, or they had it on just major, like you say, major roads. Or
well, it could be, you know, where it could be. You know, in the old days, I used to see these westerns where, like either near a ravine or a river bank, or where rainwater collects, or near the bank of the river. It's where people go and wash their clothes, like at the Ganges or whatever, that sort of river or whatever. It might be near the market. You know, they might choose to put it where, like not on the road, but like where there's people are selling fresh fruit and vegetables, and they need water for cooking those fruit and vegetables.